All right, Richard, very similar to what we saw with your older son's swing yesterday. Chris is well advanced for his age, so kudos to you, assuming you're the one that's working with him a lot. I really like the balanced setup. I think a lot of the issues we see with kids that are 7, 8, 9 years old is that they just don't start in a very strong position and it gets worse from there. So I do prefer that younger kids like this are a little bit outside their shoulders like we're seeing here. Gives them a little more balance and stability, and since we're talking about the swing starting from the ground, we have to make sure we're strong from the ground. So a good start for what we have here. There's going to be two areas that I talk about, both again in the loading process, because so much of what we have to do to create a correct unloading process starts with you first have to create a correct loading process. So if the body doesn't wind up correctly, it's not going to unwind correctly. So the earlier you make an error, the more errors it leads to throughout the swing. So a lot of what I end up dealing with is some very beginning portions of what the body is doing when it makes its initial moves and how that affects the body and the rest of the swing. So when we go back to Canerico on this other side, we're going to watch how he coils around his rear hip. We mentioned this yesterday. And it's a different type of load because your son Chris here is using a traditional stride than what your older son was doing. But notice how the belt buckle turns against his back leg, compresses that front hip against the back one while the back leg remains stationary. Chris starts and stays with neutral hips. So the loading process for him is more of, again, that push back to his backside. And there it is. And it's why you're going to see his front foot come up in the air like that. And you see how his hips are uphill at this point. I always compare that to like a dog peeing on a fire hydrant look. You know, he's lifting one leg up. But the reason that has happened is because of the overload with the torso. You can see how his shoulder is now over his shoe. So whatever gets over the shoe, it doesn't matter if it's the knee, doesn't matter if it's the hip, doesn't matter if it's the shoulder. If anything gets over the shoe, you're in an overload situation. It's going to be tough for the back knee to gain ground on time and get that weight positioned correctly back to the inside portion of his foot and leg, and then fire the hips on time. So the second thing you're seeing here with those neutral hips, as they never really compress at any point. In fact, we call this stride a reach because the hips are actually separating as they walk out. So it makes it very difficult for him to get his backside through. Now, he does have a very violent swing, and the back leg is doing its job. It's just making it tougher on him. The farther the feet get apart at that point with separated hips, it just means your backside has to be even stronger to pull the weight of the lower leg and foot through. So by this time, your femur is turning your hip chassis, and it's in control, and it's pulling the rest of the lower leg along for the ride. It gets harder to do when you get spread out like that. So we got to get him to, instead of separate the hips and walk away with neutral hips, we got to get him to do the same load we were talking about with your older son yesterday. Coil instead of rocking back, and then maintain that coil on the way out. So let's watch Canerico maintain that coil on the way out here. See how the belt buckle stays turned in that position until he's getting the foot down. Now he's ready to let the back leg open the hip chassis. So when he does that, see how his hips stay more parallel to the ground. He stays in that good balanced athletic hitting position when he lands instead of getting uphill. Now from here, he does a lot of nice things. He's getting into a scap load as he walks out, which I rarely ever see at kids this age. His lower body is in sequence, pulling the upper body. He is getting a great deal of torque for somebody his age. So he's doing a lot of really good things in the portion of actually swinging the bat. Against a firm front side, again, he gets to the right position at contact where the rear elbow's in front of the body line. He's connected and stays through the ball. So well advanced in the swing portion of it. Let's get more use of his body and his smaller frame into the ball by getting him to load correctly. So those are the two areas I wanted to point out with him, both in the loading process. That's going to feed him more energy from his lower half into the rest of the swing, and the rest of the swing can be maintained as he's doing it now. So let's work on those two areas and do a redraft, see what it looks like when we meet again sometime soon, and then I'll see how that affects the upper body, and we can go from there.